Greetings, everyone. We are starting today's webinar, and we're going to be talking about a lot of different topics in construction technology. We're here with Mark Dinius with Satterfield and Ponticus, and I'm really excited to introduce him. We'll be going over both applications, but also talking some about trends. Mark brings a really robust background, as we'll see. And I'm going to ask him a little bit about his background as we get started here. My name's Will Eichard, and I'm over research and education at BIM Global. And these webinar series are really to address practical applications of both sociology and technology in the built environment. And so we go through a large variety of topics, from design to construction to owners and operations. And so we'll be touching on those as we talk with Mark. Mark, thank you very much for making time with us. And I want to extend that thank you to Satterfield and Ponticus. Y'all have been real leaders in the technology space for well over a decade and a half. And wanted to first start off by saying welcome.
Oh, thank you for having me. Love talking about technology and, of course, our experiences, and share insights and information that we have.
Yeah. Mark, tell us, how did you get started in this this career? Where did you go to school, and how did you get into construction?
So I'm a proud Boilermaker at Purdue University, and came up through their technology program and had a focus in construction graphics, BIM, back in 2004, 2009 during my time. And, really took to just the application, the hands-on of using software in construction, and that 3D space and virtual building was just really, really cool. And I actually got hired by S&P right out of school and came down to Houston. And I've been out to Houston, San Antonio, been in the LA market, the Phoenix market, moving around for different things, come back to Houston. So I've been all different places regionally. I've worked in the K through 12 market, commercial, light industrial for S&P. I've done federal work, most recently aviation work, before I took on more of a leadership role within S&P. I've done everything from a VDC engineer up to VDC manager to project controls. I've done jobs from, I think the smallest is about 15 million up to a $2 billion program that we were overseeing at LAX. So there's all sorts of different backgrounds and applications of VDC and BIM across really the country.
And your current role at Satterfield and Ponticus is your director over technology?
That's correct. Yep. So I've got IT, I've got VDC, databasing, our analytics and BI departments. So they all roll up under me. Yeah.
Oh, incredible. Okay. So you've kind of alluded to it, but give us kind of maybe examples of kind of the breadth of projects. So you mentioned an airport at one end, but kind of give us a cross section, because I think this is something that makes S&P distinctive, when I think of building teams.
Yeah. So aviation, and doing terminal projects, even small bathroom remodels, whatever it is from that side. We've done in the federal markets, border protection stations. We've done dormitories in 2 different states, 3 different states. And we've done some also in federal, some healthcare buildings. We've done, we are a big player in the K through 12 market in Dallas and San Antonio and Houston. So a lot of education bonded work. We've done higher education as well, for mainly in the state of Texas, for Texas State, UT, Texas A&M.
Okay.
Yeah, it's anything that we can get our hands on. We like to say that we've got builders, and I think that translates across markets.
No, it does. It does. As you've looked, well, maybe let's start with the VDC aspect of it. Kind of walk us through how you've seen VDC implement it and how you approach it between large projects and small projects?
Yeah, so it's definitely different, right? And I think it depends on, one is your contract method, and making sure that what we're applying to this project is it fits what the project needs. And then the second part obviously is budget. So if we're working on a cost plus job or a CM at risk job for are going to have different strategies. And if we're working for a Fortune 100 company on a $2 billion program versus an ISD that's got a $15 million expansion, then
different.
We want to make sure that we're aligning the resources that best fit those jobs. I may not need to do the 4D synchro and or 4D application, or do a 5D kind of cost analysis on something that's a $15 million job versus something that's a $2 billion program. Or I may not need to do even production trends for our subcontractors and stuff like that. So it's really fitting best value into what that project really needs and what the owners need to make sure we keep on, obviously, our high risk budget schedule, quality and safety.
When you look at that, like, let's take the 15 million is pretty relatively small, we would say. Where would you start on a small job like that?
So I mean,
VDC approach.
On the VDC approach, obviously, I think we're in the logistics planning is probably the first really step into it. Let me back up. It depends, right? So if it's like, we go back to the delivery method, right? If it's a bid build, then we're going into logistics planning and execution, right? If it's something where we're CM at risk and we're still in design, or if it's a design build, we are more involved in the process of using architects and engineers models to track quantities, provide value feedback on constructability and maybe different materials, using our knowledge of the markets for lead time to provide insights to our owner and to our architect and engineering teams to say what's going to keep us on cost and what's going to keep us on budget, right?
Right.
We're more integrated into a shared environment where they're picking our brain on construction aspects, and we're giving them real-time insights into the budget as we go through the design experience versus something that's just a bid build, right?
How are you finding the design teams on those size projects as far as their capabilities in VDC in general and BIM in specific? And maybe can it break that into either architecture, structure, or MEP systems?
Gotcha. Great question. I don't want to drive the bus over anybody, so I'm going to use a sliding scale here, right?
Sure.
I think that if you lump in architects, engineers, throw contractors in that mix, and trade contractors, I think the smaller the project, the more limited the resources that are used to get to a deliverable. I think the bigger the project, the more leeway and the more resources that you have on a project, right? So something that's a very, very large scale project is going to have certainly a lot more people and systems than something that's on a small project. And the same thing goes as the trade contractors that can execute that kind of work on a $15 million job. The pool is a lot bigger. On a $2 billion job, a lot smaller, right?
Yeah, definitely.
So I think the same thing applies to architects, engineers, and contractors. So I think it, you get into a best value scenario when you're on a $15 million budget versus your pool on $2 billion is who is going to provide, maximum value as far as keeping that entire 5, 10, 12-year project on track versus something where it's maybe a quicker burn of a $15 million job, right?
On these smaller ones, how often are you able to engage the design team, say 90% CDs, or, before issued for construction comes out, if they have, say, a 75% pricing set, are you finding openness on these smaller jobs for the design team to engage where you're looking at the models together? Or is it really more design bid build and a more traditional just plans and specs, the documents control?
So at least in our Texas region, which is where we primarily operate, we are seeing more of the latter. So we are seeing more of companies that want to, even on a $15 million job, move towards CM at risk or a design where the contractor comes in earlier.
Okay.
Than we did previously. And I think a lot of that has to do with, COVID and getting into material shortages and labor shortages. And I think that the volatility of that supply and that demand in the market, the materials feeding these projects, has caused owners to really rethink their strategy. 5 years ago, 10 years ago, a lot more clients, especially on a $15 million job, are saying, here's plans, here's specs, let's get to work. And I think now they are having to shift their mentality to say, what's going to hang up on this job? What can't we get? What's the long lead time for electrical equipment? Do we have any long span joists or joists that are going to be driving schedule? And how does that impact me? Because, ultimately contractors and trade contractors want to share in that risk, and owners are starting to recognize that. And then instead of if they take on a little bit more of that risk and have the contractor in there early to share in that they get a better product, they get to stay closer to budget, and they get to stay closer to schedule. Having that conversation and bringing in a contractor or a trade partner earlier in the process to really be part of that team, right? And just sharing those insights.
Do you see any projects where we're going to talk a little bit about how technology's evolved over last decade plus, but looking at the new options we have to easily or much easierly integrate cloud-based models, are you seeing openness where design teams are even letting you to work within the same models with them? And what project size are you seeing that occur on?
So we are not seeing that. So
okay.
Actually, we're seeing a little bit of the opposite, right? So, we, even on a bid build, it's sometimes difficult to get the model ahead of even the bid. And we want to use that. We want to use that model to help us
inform
to talk to contractors and validate quantities and look at scope. And we're still having issues getting it from architects and engineers in that capacity, right? Now, after contracts are in place, we'll get the model after that fact. But I think that there's a loss of that information that comes from that model that could be used to an owner's into a project's advantage by having the contractor in there with that information.
Yeah.
I've seen it where, when we get into like a VE exercise, we'll bring in the architect, and our team will run in Revit with their models to go through the changes, and we're doing the tagging, and we're using, some software that compares model versions to the baseline to look at quantities and the changes in those. Right. And that's the time that I've seen us where we've run in parallel with the engineer and architect team, the design team, to do that. And then at the end of it, the model that we've tagged with VE that comes with quantities. Actually, we've used in that scenarios, we've used it to take images and quantities from that model and actually written them into subcontractor agreements to better control the information that happens from during the VE process, to keep trade partners accountable, us accountable, and then keep the design team accountable for the decisions that are made during that process.
Right. Are you finding y'all are needing to model, for example, you need a solid structural model with elements at LOD 300 or better to define geometry. However, many design teams still have releases that say We may even share the model with you, but we dare you to use it. Our 2D documents control, and you have to sign all these releases as the GC. Are you finding your teams are vetting the concrete and the steel models that you share with your MEP trades, or are you having to go and just model it yourself? Because you're taking on that risk of the structure model for coordination, and you need it early. Your steel fabricators might have the structural steel model, but what are you seeing like on the concrete side, and how are you addressing that structural backbone? Because that's what your MEP trades need for coordination.
Right. So on a on a bid build type scenario, we're using that design model for validation of quantities, subcontractor agreement, right?
Yep.
But there becomes a point in time where you transition from those design models into the fabrication level of models, and we're seeing our structural partners bring in. So we've got companies that we work with for concrete that will go and model separately their concrete model that we then bring in. And then you have same thing with our structural steel fabricators and erectors. They'll bring in their steel model, and it's kind of the same process as what it is for traditional mechanical, electrical, plumbing, right?
Mm-hmm.
We're using the structural subcontractors that will bring models to the table from a fabrication level. And we're kind of, eliminating the original AE models at that point.
Right.
And it's tough, because then eventually you come back to the owner, and the owner wants to see everything in a usable format at the end, right? Yeah.
Right.
So there's always a conversation about what the turnover is, whether it's in a format that was similar to design, or the final coordinated model that might be in, a product that they're not quite sure how to ingest for operations and facilities management.
Right. And we've talked before on these webinars. BIM Forum stays agnostic. It wouldn't be any surprise. There's probably one dominant design platform that you see a lot of. And, on the steel fabrication side, there's probably 3 dominant ones out there, none of which are typically associated with designers using. They're typically the steel fabricators and the detailers under them. And then on the concrete side, there are a few options out there in the marketplace that are handling fabrication level information. One of them that has come along is probably that one that's very dominant by a lot of design teams. And so as a contractor, are you prescribing what softwares for modeling that your trades are using for any of the different trades? And then are you prescribing what coordination federation software you're using with the trades? Or like on the modeling side, you just let the trades, if your modeling platform will give me a file that'll work with my federation clash detection software, then you can do anything you want. How is Satterfield and Pontigas approaching that?
So first I'll trace back to our requirements on us from the owner. If the owner is requiring us to turn over a final as-built federated model, then we track backwards from that, right? And we'll follow the path of least resistance to get to that. If there's not that kind of standard or requirement within our contract, then we let the teams use what they're most comfortable with, right? We want them to be the most accurate. So we let our trade partners use a software that they want to use.
Right.
We dictate what the federation of those models and the clash detection of them. We dictate what that environment is, because that becomes our means and methods, right? So we'll dictate that, and we control what that is, even down to naming conventions and breaking up the models in areas. Like we may specify, depending on the level of complexity of the job and file sizes, we may dictate all the way down to even how they are terminated over.
Right. We've seen some chip manufacturers, even in the Texas market, with some very large facilities, are having all the trades remodel after they've finished their fabrication model, go back and update the design platform. And it is and for some of them, it is a notable duplication of effort. And for that particular owner, they've created internal checking processes for scheduling and project, long-term project operation, and they want that model in their platform that their designers work in. But in some cases, it's almost doubled the shop and fabrication detailing budgets. And so it's no small order, for teams. If you see an owner that has these requirements, it has a lot of ripple effects. And for that particular owner, they feel it's worth it. And in that regard, many just follow the golden rule. Whoever has the gold gets to make the rules in that regard. But what are you seeing as far as, if you lined up the trades you're working with, because you've really touched on a really strong dichotomy. You as the lead in the CM at risk or general contractor, you're getting some models from design team that are ahead of you in schedule, and you're bringing in and buying out your trade partners. And if you line them up, we've got, the structural groups with steel, concrete, masonry. You'll do very much with wood framing projects, like 4 or 5 story wood frame.
Yes, we've got an entire multifamily division that will take and use a couple plugins to get down into almost like a bill of materials for wood.
Oh, okay. And then we look over from structure. We've got the enclosure side, where again, masonry, curtain wall, roofing, waterproofing. We've got that whole cadre of systems. And then when we look to the MEP side, mechanical, electrical, plumbing, sprinkled throughout between enclosures and structures, you have cold form metal framing and drywall. So if you had to think of all those different team members and trade partners, fire protection's mixed in there. Are there some that you're consistently seeing as an industry? If I could wave a wand, these are 2 or 3 of them I wish would be more BIM enabled in that mixture.
Yeah, most definitely, right?
Mm-hmm.
The one that probably comes top to mind would be plumbing.
Okay.
But really, electrical is up there a lot too.
Sure. And is that on the smaller projects you're seeing that?
I was just sitting there thinking about it, and that's why I hesitated, right? Because
Sure.
I'm trying to draw from my knowledge of work in LA and definitely down here in Texas. And I think Texas, the market that we're working in down here, sees a lot of electrical and plumbing that we wish more of those scopes, more of those contractors carried a VDC department to work on that. We find ourselves modeling a lot of that ourselves, or having to go through to some trusted partners to have them build the model for our contractors.
Mm-hmm.
I think, we talk about the top end of that. Mechanical has always pushed the boundaries, I think.
Sure.
With general contractors, they've had to own a lot of that risk. And I think even sometimes GCs will ask the mechanical sub to carry the load of coordination. So I think that they're at the top rung.
Right.
Yeah, we're getting into wood framing. I haven't heard of anybody that's doing wood framing, and we've self-performed it, which is why we went that route, right? There are some really, really good cold form type of companies out there that are pushing the boundaries, and love to see it, especially when it comes to some automation of layout and things that are making their life super easy. Plumbing and electrical jumped, I think, the top of my list. The funny part is fire is, I think, is over overlooked sometimes of how well the fire protection companies are in the way that they model, and then using tools to really push the boundaries of their model and the engineering and the calculations that they're doing. So yeah, probably, picking on electrical and plumbing, it would be the two of them that I'm seeing for Houston market.
That's a good point. We're seeing, we're also seeing on smaller jobs, the mechanical contractor may not be banging their own ductwork. They may have a ductwork manufacturer. They hire third party under them, and they typically are modeling because they're using that to drive their CNC fabrication processes. But even their mechanical piping, they don't model. And so sometimes we'll see teams where they'll hire yet a support modeler to do the mechanical piping, because they've got a really LOD 350 to 400 ductwork model, and they just don't model mechanical piping. Those detailers that are manufacturing the duct don't do it. The mechanical contractor may not have an in-house VDC team, and then plumbing might be a separate company. It's not integrated, and so those are dynamics we see maybe on smaller projects and the trade partners that operate in those realms. Is that kind of what you're seeing in Houston market?
Yes. Yep. So yeah, definitely smaller jobs there are more opportunities, I think, to have bundled up where somebody's going to do their own. They're not going out to a third party, and then they'll do plumbing and piping for mechanical and their sheet metal, right?
Yep.
I actually think on the larger jobs, it gets interesting too, because you get less of an opportunity where you can choose a subcontractor to perform both, plumbing and mechanical together, just because of the sheer manpower requires to do that. So on the large jobs, you have to coordinate between those two companies, and you see less of that opportunity there versus something where we've had a couple $100 to $200 million jobs in Houston where we can package that up, and we've been successful by having that run out of one company to do those two divisions together.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Really, well, I'd be interested to get your take on it. From some of the research we've been doing, it definitely seems that you've moved your coordination ahead if you've gotten your gravity pipes and your large duct worked out together. Yep. And main electric runs. And then if you can get those fitting above the ceiling, you're well on your way in the process. And if you've got one company that's been tasked with 2 out of those 3, then they're hopefully internally self-coordinating. Right.
Well, sometimes when you have the same engineer doing mechanical, plumbing, fire drawings, you're hoping that they're coordinated in-house as well, right?
Correct. And I've seen the same aspirational hope when you have civil structural firms. Yep. And you've got complicated sites, and the owner is writing, the architect and owner are writing one check to one firm that's both civil and structural. And you have this aspirational hope that they coordinated things like retaining walls and foundation systems. And so that's another aspect of it when you've got these multidisciplinary firms. Well, I think we talked about small, medium, large projects. Where are you seeing the most third-party work? Because it seems like it would be on small, but it's not intuitively obvious, because very large projects have high demands. Yep. And teams may do load balancing. And of the third-party modeling work you're seeing where a trade partner is paired up with a third party, kind of talk to me what you're seeing, the differences between overseas modeling, where you've got time zones, versus domestic, North American based modeling, where you've got same time zone, but maybe not the perceived cost benefits
Gotcha.
in labor rates.
Gotcha. Yeah. So we, thankfully we've got a big enough shop that we don't outsource too much, but definitely working with trade partners and encouraging them to, if they don't have an in-house VDC team, then to bring in a trusted partner to do that. So we're working with those teams that are offshore, or at least same time zone and domestic. To answer the first question, the complex jobs are probably where I see the most where support's needed. Whether that's either the GC bringing in someone that's like hyper focused and comes with that expertise to execute. They find the advantage in bringing in the subject matter experts to their group on these large projects. And typically you'll see these companies run with the GC, contracted with the GC, that then drive the process. If the GC carries it themselves, then we'll see smaller groups go out and look for quotes from BIM companies to help support their efforts in this.
Right.
So complex jobs for sure. The smaller jobs, it's tough, right? I want to say every job deserves BIM, and I think that BIM does provide a value on jobs of all sizes. But it kind of gets into, what are some of the challenges of the job, and how budget constrained it is, right? Because there's, owners sometimes think that BIM is a means and methods for GCs, when really the value goes through all levels.
Right.
So all levels of the trade partners and all the stakeholders in that job. So it just kind of depends on some of the constraints of that particular job.
That's a good point, because even on middle schools and high schools, some owners within the design specs, they'll have clearances specified for maintenance of the system operations.
Yep.
And I won't say that it can't be done without BIM. It just seems it has been more helpful if you've got mechanical clearance, filter change areas outlined with clearance zones. The owners do get a better, more functional, coordinated above ceiling space, it seems, when BIM is used properly.
Yep.
To your point, though, on smaller jobs, you've got both schedule. If you've got trade partners that don't have in-house VDC departments, there's a scheduling aspect beyond just the cost. But also, if their management team is not used to reviewing the models, it's hard to really do it efficiently if they're not using it as part of their business model. But are you finding where you might do key areas? For example, in some of our research, we'll see GC teams on smaller applications with limited budget just focusing on challenging areas, and it's not the entire building. Like one of them, middle school, your life science classrooms don't have wet lab kind of functionality, and you have a pretty big above ceiling space with bar joists. They just said 40 feet from electrical rooms, mechanical rooms, we're running coordination. And beyond that, y'all just route, as you always do, and field coordinate. Are you seeing Satterfield and Batigas take any hybrid approaches like that on small jobs?
Yeah, I wouldn't actually say it's small jobs. It becomes those jobs where, budget's tight, or an owner doesn't necessarily see the value in it. It's hard for us to carry the full burden of that cost as the GC.
Right.
So we may say, okay, we're going to do not only core areas, but core systems. So we may say anything that's pressure pipe, we're not going to model. Anything that needs rise and fall is going to be modeled. If there's anything that's limited bend radius, we're going to do that. If there's duct banks or electrical lines, they're going to be packaged up together to fit a certain size. then we may do those. Otherwise, we're looking for pinch points in the building, areas of overlap where you might have systems coming across each other instead of running parallel. Or we'll look at the constructability, the phasing of the work to make sure that we're coming out of the right area, that they're not hanging branch lines first. Can we do mechanical rooms and electrical rooms earlier in the sequencing of our work so that we've got more time as we branch out, instead of starting in the other areas where you're the furthest from it and then working towards it, right? Because you're at that point, you've got a lot of things that are in place before you get to the core structure, right?
Yeah, another one that's come up, and I think you mentioned y'all also do high rise, and this probably comes up in multifamily. Some of the research we've done will show teams might do ground floor or second floor, but then when the levels start stacking, they might detail coordinate distinctive floors. Are y'all applying processes like that?
Yes. So there's efficiency gains in similar floor plans, right?
Yep.
So if levels 3 through 9 are going to be the same, what we'll do is we'll coordinate the first, but we're actually still populating content on 4 through 9, 3 through 9, right? And then we focus more on the vertical ingress and egress of like the different systems that are coming in and out, to make sure that as we're going up and down in size, that our chases are all the same and going to work, right? We still do sign-offs with the subcontractors for every floor. We still populate the content. I think that it doesn't take a lot from our team to just replicate it and run through it. And I think that it doesn't take a lot from our trade partners to just review it and to make sure that there's nothing else that's out there, but then sign off on it. And then, then we get to the unique floors, or if we change plans, then we'll go and start again and do that run.
You in preparing for this, we visited a little bit about risk factors, and I want to kind of leave this open for you to take them a few areas. When we think about risks, there's always the big four, it seems like, in the sense of, quality, schedule, budget, and if you're anywhere around construction, safety is another one in there. But you touched a little previously on some of the price. We talked about, in the post-COVID era, we've got material shortages, we've got price fluctuations, supply and demand. But kind of talk on where you see VDC as a tool in managing risk, and where you think Satterfield and Benticus is taking it moving forward.
Yeah. So if you think back, pre-BIM, or at least early adoption of BIM, you're using, Excel or databases to do estimating or scheduling, even looking at quality, right? And using photos or data points of what's gone wrong on other jobs to try to get ahead of the next job. I think the really big advantage that BIM and VDC has brought to all of these different risk factors is the visualization factor, right? So not only now am I saying, yes, here's some plans and here's, I can see it on the plan, but in the model, it's helping me quantify and visualize that budget or that estimate. In scheduling, I'm able to visually now see where in my sequencing of work I might have issues, or if I've got out of sequence logic. It's not going back through a Gantt chart and trying to figure out exactly what pieces and parts are there. So I think there's so much to the visualization side of that. And then as you start to stack then more data on top of the visual side, you can really get into that 4D, 5D, the 60s of the aspect, because you can use that data to then churn back through all of the visual side, and you're kind of creating these layers of how you can manage your risk better, right?
Right.
I had a mentor say, that BIM is great because you can sit there and you can spin it around, and you can look at everything on all sides. Well, in risk, when you add the extra layers of data to that, now I can look for it, spin it around, and look for the items that are going to trip me up in the process, right? So I
Right.
can look at subcontractor production using BIM and schedule, right? To sit there and find the subcontractor that may not be meeting plan and get to them earlier in the process to mitigate the bigger risk of hitting the late finish of our schedule, right?
Right.
There's so many things inside it, even safety, right? I was working with, a proud Boilermaker working with Purdue University. They have come up with a couple different things that I think are really cool, where they're churning through the BIM model to try to use OSHA data to analyze the model and find the higher risk areas for safety. And
Okay.
I think it's a really cool thing
Yeah.
to use it. And, they can ingest even our safety information to find what we're, having issues with, and then analyze a job so that we can get ahead of and create awareness with our trade partners and teams to try to stay ahead of those areas. And it's a really cool concept. I think safety is going to get there in the next couple of years, and I think it's going to be really cool.
Yeah, it brings up a really powerful point. Safety shows up, yes, in OSHA. From some of the audience from the structural background may remember when OSHA started dictating how many anchor rods you had to have in place on columns for erection stability and what kind of connections you had. That rewrote the steel design codes. It rewrote requirements that design professionals had to do for their structural design. And it came by way of OSHA. And in the international building codes in 2000, they implemented seismic consideration nationwide in a lot of areas that really had never thought about seismic. And if you were essential facilities with very massive structures, you'd start to find seismic begin to control your design, even here in Texas, when that was a hard one to explain to an owner, but it was a building code induced seismic event. And to your point, when you start to consider safety, I could see either by way of OSHA or building codes that, if research did demonstrate that sites and projects were safer if they planned things out better with BIM, that you could start to see requirements that would really change things very rapidly. Because I think that, to your point, the technology's there. I think it's just managing the business case. But as research on safety does start to emerge, the third driver, I mentioned building codes, I mentioned OSHA. Another third driver is bonding and insurance companies and the sureties. And if they start to see that their risk is lower on projects that are planned better, they could create drivers outside, even government regulation and building codes that could drive things rapidly as well. So I think any one of those three channels could, as well as general contractors that want to be leaders in planning and take safety seriously.
I absolutely agree.
Yeah.
The insurance side is one of the angles that I think you're hitting on that's really big there too. And I think that as they evolve, 100%, they're going to be digging into process and looking at your tool sets to assess the riskiness. And so it's, yeah. Well said.
What are you seeing in the areas of other forms of risk management? I think in the past you've mentioned egress planning and things like that.
Yeah. So talking specifically like the schedule and risk management through a scheduling tool, a 4D scheduling tool is really cool. One of the biggest things that comes to mind is that when we were working out at Los Angeles Airport, a project is a complicated project where they're actually, cutting the building into a couple sections, and they're going to drop the head house and rebuild it. and it's right up against the curb, right? So as you get off of your taxi or your Uber to get out there, and you walk across that curb, the construction zone and the demo zone is right up against where passenger flow is. And in some cases, we even had a cantilevered overhang that would come out over the walkway that needed to be demoed. And so I'm sure anybody that's flown through Los Angeles knows the pain of getting around their U-shaped drive to get through the drop-off. So the airport is very sensitive to us closing down multiple lanes to come through and to slice that up and pick it apart, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we actually used microphasing of a 4D schedule, microphasing of our schedule, linked it to 4D, and then walked the airport authority through that. And we were showing which lanes we needed and when. We were showing the ADA ramps that were a certain number of ramps had to be active during this time. So we had to phase according to where people could be dropped off, and then going up these ramps or building temporary ramps for them to get access to the sidewalk. But it went through, the whole demo sequence was less than 4 weeks. But we went through probably 30 different stages of how to bring that down to show where passengers were walking, because sometimes we would have to create barricades in the actual drive for them to walk through to bring this down. And then how would those barricades shift and move so that we would show how the passengers are going to be safe? How does it impact the traffic coming through there? Are there still ADA accessible ramps for them to walk through, or does there need to be a temporary one? But all of this to coordinate how to do that, and using BIM and using our schedule to create that, provided that trust between us and the airport authority and our owner to then go execute this work, knowing that of what the repercussions are and the time period of this impact. And so
when you're working in those, is Satterfield and Ponticus self-performing any of the creation of that temporary, or you have trade partners you're outsourcing that to? And then are you helping provide layout drawings for them?
So
or are you sharing the model? How are you doing that?
Yeah. So we didn't have to have a full deliverable plan set for that phasing, but what we did do is produce, just high level top down views of the roadways that are being blocked off, how many lanes, what is the distance between the ADA ramps, and marking those up. So we provided some shop drawings basically of this phasing. And we self-performed that. We pulled the models, your Jersey barricades with like the fences that go up, and we pulled those off of some more traditional sites, and then modified them to fit what our subcontractors were using.
Okay.
So yeah, it was all in all, the effort took a lot longer than it was, but it was cool to see the value that it provided to all the stakeholders to walk through this, and then, shed everybody's unease about the risk of taking up space on the land side and pulling this down, but making sure that you're not going to frustrate all the passengers and all of the traffic that goes through there.
Yeah. Is Satterfield and Ponticus or other GCs using these models? I assume, like most GCs, y'all have frequent safety meetings. Are y'all using the models to walk projects with teams while you're doing safety reviews?
Yeah, so recently that's a new occurrence for us.
Okay.
We had a school that was going to have an auditorium that was going to build like it's like a 65 foot high CMU wall. And when you looked at the phasing of that work, that wall was going to get erected very early, and then it would basically sit until a lot of the steel could be brought back to it. And so, we identified, looking through the 4D schedule of this job, that this was going to happen. And we started to have a conversation really early in the process with our engineers on how to properly support and brace that wall,
right?
To make sure that that we're getting ahead of safety impacts or potential safety impacts that are there. So we've started to find a lot more that instead of just churning through the simulation back in our office, to generate it and then send our team out to sit there and have the team review the constructability and walk through it so that they can address any concerns or issues or problems that they're seeing. And our next goal is to bring the safety team in there too, to sit in and watch so that they get more familiar with the job and the sequencing and have more insights before they show up on site.
Sure. This has gone very fast, Mark, and I want to thank you for your time here. I had so many questions. I'm going to skip to one at the end here, just because we only have maybe 5 minutes left. And what do you see as the future of VDC, and maybe what the greatest challenges are over the next 2 to 5 years? And how do you see teams overcoming them?
Yeah, I think the future of VDC is connected data, right? I think that data is becoming so important. The data that's inside of these BIM models is so important that I think that we're going to see in the next 2 to 5 years a lot more systems that are using that data, how to shed that risk, right? What are your biggest risk factors and how to address those, and using this data to do that.
Mm-hmm.
I think the future is in there. I'm hoping we see some better transparency, cooperation between the stakeholders, right? And I'm hoping it goes that way. Traditionally, it hasn't. I think it's to the best advantage to owners, and to the overall success of the project.
Mm-hmm.
Don't know if it's going to happen or not, but it's on the want list, right?
Definitely. To that point on connected data, how many owners are starting, or what are you seeing out there among owners and requesting IFC and open standard formats?
Not a ton. I see more owners that are conflicted with that they want to have O&M, right? They want a digital twin of their building at the end of it, and they're not quite sure how to get there. And so I think that they're conflicted with, of either choosing a system that they can use or a system that they already have, and they're not 100% locked into how to manage that. So I don't see them putting anything on the front end that says, an open IFC or an open format, or I see them more geared towards the end product and what their use of it is.
That makes sense. Mark, again, I definitely want to find a time to invite you back later, because there's so much to go over, and this hour went really fast. For our audience, we'll have this video posted along with any notes from it. Additionally, for those who are not aware, the BIM Forum Global's LOD specification 22 version has been out. We're currently developing the 23 version, and we'll be publishing that for public comment shortly. And you may go to bimforum.global/LOD to access that file and PDFs and resources. Mark, again, thank you for your time, and thank you to the whole Satterfield and Pontigas team for helping be a part of this week.
Yeah, thanks for having me, and happy to have any conversations in the future.
Definitely. Thank you. Take care, my friend.
Thank you.